Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we're discussing Game 38 of the regular season between the San Jose Sharks and the Anaheim Ducks, in which the Sharks have lost 5-1. This was a pretty disappointing loss from a Sharks fan perspective. The Sharks were on a 4-game winning streak coming into this game, and they had moved to within 1 point of a playoff spot, trailing the Arizona Coyotes. And, it was just 2-3 weeks ago where many people thought that the Sharks' playoff hopes were completely gone and they'd never catch the St. Louis Blues. And because of the St. Louis Blues' free fall, and because of the fact that the Sharks have looked very good over the past couple of weeks, they managed to actually tie them up in points, and it seems as though the Coyotes are going to be the real trouble for the Sharks if they want to get into that 4th place spot. And with the Coyotes over the past couple of days getting a couple of wins to now move 5 points ahead of the Sharks, this was one that they kind of needed to win since it's one of the easier games on the schedule left. And in the end, the Sharks came out with a complete dud. They had some decent chances in this game that they ended up getting stonewalled by John Gibson, but mostly the Sharks just seemed kind of out of sorts all across the ice, defensively, offensively, and they ended up losing. In the first period, as I said, there were a couple of good opportunities, one with Hurdle near the end, but in the end, the Ducks would have the only goal of that first 20 minutes coming from Adam Henrique. Come to the second period, the Ducks would expand on their lead, make it 2-0 with Comtois' goal. The Sharks would get one back with a Patrick Marleau power play goal to make it 2-1. However, the Ducks would very soon after get a goal from Lundestrom to make it 3-1, and that would do it for any Sharks goal scoring. The Ducks would add a goal from Delorier to make it 4-1 at the end of the second period. And in the third period, we get some very interesting coaching decisions. The first 10-12 minutes of this period would pass by with not much doing, the Sharks not really getting anything generated. And as such, Bob Booner makes the bold call to pull the goalie. Now, I will say this. In this particular situation, it didn't seem to really work out all that well, considering I don't think the team was really aware that the Sharks were pulling the goalie, and the Ducks essentially scored instantly on the empty net. I mean, even me personally, when I saw the Ducks skate in and shoot at the empty net, I was thinking, when did Jones actually leave? However, I will say that the thought process behind pulling the goaltender in a situation like that, I do think is actually rather sound. Some teams don't even pull the goaltender when they're down by 3 goals, which I honestly don't understand. What's the difference between losing 4-1 and losing 5-1? It doesn't make much of a difference at all, so you might as well try on the off chance you're able to make the comeback. And a lot of teams also end up pulling the goaltender in a situation like that with, let's say, 4 minutes remaining on the clock. And it just feels as though scoring 3 goals in those last 4 minutes is a very, very tall task to ask of your team. However, if you can pull the goalie, let's say with 7 minutes, like in this case remaining, if you get just 1 goal, you can begin to get a bit of a ball rolling in favor of your team, get some momentum generated. So I do think this was a decent call by Bob Booner. Just in the end, the details of it all definitely didn't fall into place. But first thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, as he has a very difficult to analyze game. You take a look at some of the saves he made. He made multiple great saves in this game. A 2-on-0 save in the third period. He had a big blocker save onto Cam Fowler, and 3 of the 4 goals that he let in against the Ducks, I wouldn't necessarily put any blame on him for. The Comtois goal was a tip on the back door with poor defensive coverage in front. The goal from Delorier was just an unlucky bounce off of the skate of Shemek straight to Delorier for him to be able to put it into the empty net, as well as poor defensive coverage in front. And with Henrique, again, a theme tonight, poor defensive coverage. This was one he maybe could have had, at least compared to the previous 2, though I will say, Henrique is in close, definitely still a difficult save. The main problem and what makes this a difficult game to analyze for Martin Jones is because this third goal. So this was a goal scored after the Sharks had just cut into the lead with a Patrick Marleau power play goal. Maybe the momentum could be shifting towards them, and then all of a sudden, it's just this weak shot from the perimeter that comes on net for Martin Jones. He's kind of surprised by it, then he's unable to cover the puck, and eventually the Ducks retrieve it, pass it in front for Lundestrom's easy tap-in goal. And it was kind of reminiscent of a goal scored in the exact previous game between the Sharks and the Los Angeles Kings by Trevor Moore shorthanded, where it was an easy shot that Jones needs to be able to save and then hold the rebound on, but instead was leaving that rebound open. And in the Kings game, Moore, whacks away at it and manages to push it through. And in this game, the Ducks retrieve it and work it back to the front of the net for the easy tap-in goal. So Jones had good saves. He had very little chance on most of the goals scored, but because of that one crucial mistake that definitely ended up burning the Sharks, although I won't say they were going to necessarily come back in that game and win if this doesn't happen, it's hard to say that Jones was necessarily fantastic in this game or anything like that. He was not the primary reason the Sharks lost, but he definitely played at the very least a small part. Next, I'll be talking about Christian Jaros as he joins into the lineup here as the sixth defenseman for the San Jose Sharks due to the injury of Marc-Edouard Vlasic. And, the Sharks were running a pretty fragile sixth defensive core already coming into this season. They kind of were thanking their lucky stars that Nikolai Knyzhov actually panned out and ended up being a very solid defenseman for them to run even in their top four. And so they had actual six defensemen to ice night in, night out that they could be proud of. But with one of them out of the lineup, even with Vlasic not looking all that great this season, the Sharks don't necessarily have a good option at the sixth place. Now, Jaros, this is his first game as a Shark. He was picked up earlier this season. Maybe that was going to change here tonight, but didn't really seem to be the case. Jaros wasn't necessarily effective offensively at all. He kind of looked a bit lost defensively at times, and in the end also made a huge mistake on this fourth goal from the Anaheim Ducks. Shemek is covering the shooter on this goal, and Jaros is, for whatever reason, also covering the shooter on this goal instead of going to Delorier. And so while this ended up being an unlucky bounce, and so Jones had no chance to save it, Jaros, if he was in position, may have been able to actually deflect this puck and prevent it from going in the net, but instead he kind of just looked very confused about the whole thing. And so Jaros was not the savior of the Sharks' the seventh defenseman position, and I would not necessarily be too surprised to see him get the game on Friday, just because, again, the Sharks don't have much of a better option in this position, but I also wouldn't be too surprised to see someone like Claesson step back into the lineup. Next, I'll talk about John Leonard. He has another pretty solid game here tonight. We already saw him make a nice play to set up the game winner from Gambrell in the previous game against the Los Angeles Kings. I thought Leonard was one of the more effective forwards for the San Jose Sharks here tonight. And, he had a couple of great chances, just couldn't really get it past Gibson. And it just feels as though Leonard is so close to really breaking through and, putting up some points here and really asserting himself as an NHL player. I'm not going to say he's going to suddenly shoot up and become a 30-goal scorer, 40-goal scorer, certainly not, but he's been an effective third-line player for the San Jose Sharks in the past few games, and I really think he's close to actually getting somewhere here. Will it happen at some point this season? It's hard to say, especially since down the stretch, as the Sharks are likely going to be pushing for a playoff spot unless something drastic happens over the past few games, over the past few days, the next few days. Let's say something at the trade deadline or the Sharks just go on a crazy losing streak. It's possible that since the Sharks will be pushing pretty hard for the playoff spot, they're not going to be, playing their third and fourth lines too much in terms of ice time. And so this could be something that happens in the following season for John Leonard, but it does feel like he's definitely sort of teetering on an edge here where we could really see him break out and become an effective winger at the NHL level. And finally, I'll talk about Noah Gregor, a player who steps into the lineup here tonight over Marcus Sorensen, who interestingly enough was taken out of the lineup not due to injury, but the rumor at the very least is that they did not want to play him because of the risk of getting injured. You see this a lot for teams who are planning to try and unload a player at the trade deadline, and they don't want that player to get injured to hurt his value. So for instance, Taylor Hall of the Buffalo Sabres, who most recently did not play in the Sabres game because they plan on trading him at the deadline and they don't want to risk injury. So the Sharks did, or seemingly did, a similar thing with Marcus Sorensen here tonight, and Gregor was the beneficiary of that and managed to step into the lineup. And I have had a lot of disagreements with the way Bob Booner has handled the lineup thus far this season, and I think there's been none more egregious than the handling of Noah Gregor. I don't think Gregor is a fantastic player or anything like that, but I do think he's a pretty decent fourth liner. He seems to have some solid speed, some decent physicality, and also a pretty good shot. He's got 3 goals on the season, which is not fantastic, but then he's also only played about 15 or 16 games, and that's significantly better than some of the other Sharks fourth liners that they've been icing so far this season. And yet, for whatever reason, Gregor sat out at a point an entire month before finally finding his way back into the lineup for this game, and that's only because Sorensen was sitting out because of this sort of trade deadline precaution, I guess you could say. Otherwise, Gregor may not have even found himself back into the lineup, which I kind of find to be disappointing, especially since Gregor, it seems as though over the next couple of years he could be a decent part of the Sharks' future, of the Sharks lineup, maybe being a consistent fourth line forward, and even has the potential to become a player kind of like Barclay Goodrow was for the Sharks before they traded him last season. You know, a 15 to 20 point scorer, an effective penalty killer maybe, and it would just be nice to see Noah Gregor at the very least somewhat more consistently in the lineup. I'm not expecting him to play 56 of the 56 games or 82 in a full game season of the 82 games, but I'm also hoping to not see him get healthy scratched for an entire month. But that will do it for this review. The Sharks will be back in action on Friday as they'll take on the Los Angeles Kings. They'll have that game against the Kings on Friday and the game against them as well on Saturday, and those will be the final 2 games before the trade deadline on Monday, and those 2 games can be pivotal in deciding what the Sharks actually do before the deadline passes on that Monday. If they win both of those games, the Sharks may in fact hold on to some of their assets instead of trading them. For instance, someone like Devan Dubnyk may stay with the team down the stretch if the Sharks can win those next couple of games. If the Sharks lose those 2 games, and especially if the Arizona Coyotes pull further ahead in the playoff race and widen their point lead gap to 7 or maybe even 9 points, it's possible that the Sharks will be a bit more seller at the deadline. So it's going to be a very interesting next few days for the San Jose Sharks, and we'll see how it plays out. Class dismissed.